Welcome to another episode of Silk and Steel Podcast. I am your host, Carl Zha. Today is August 11th, 2019, and we have a very special treat for you. I appear as a guest on Uproar in the Studio, a China Blockbuster podcast with Andrew, Noah, and Reza. They run a very entertaining podcast about all the Chinese blockbusters. I had the honor to appear on their show before to talk about Monster Hunt, film mostly targeted at children. At this time, thankfully, they invited me to talk about a far more entertaining movie, Wolf Warrior 2, or what I call Chinese Rambo. Check out their podcast and enjoy.
Welcome to Uproar in the Studio, your bi-weekly New York-based Chinese Blockbuster Podcast. It is the end of Season 1 of this podcast. I'm Noah.
I'm Reza.
I'm Andrew.
For our final episode of Season 1, we are talking about Wolf Warrior 2, released on July 28th, 2017. It made almost $900 million. You don't have to see the movie, we'll give a synopsis, but if you want to watch it unspoiled, and this one might actually be worth watching unspoiled, maybe listen to the show after.
Later, we'll have two interviews that probably constitute the most comprehensive source in English on the making of Wolf Warrior 2. First, we'll be talking about the score with the film's composer, Joseph Trapanese, whose work has previously appeared in Tron Legacy, Oblivion, and The Greatest Showman. His latest score can be heard in this summer's Stuber.
After, we'll have action director Sam Hargrave, whose stunt coordinating can also be seen in the Avengers films and Atomic Blonde. His directorial debut is the forthcoming Daka.
But before that, we are talking about the movie with friend of the show, Carl Zha, host of the podcast Silk and Steel. Follow him on Twitter at Carl Zha to check out his travels through China. Here is our conversation. When Lang Feng, an elite soldier of the PLA, is disgraced and imprisoned for the unintentional murder of a haughty real estate magnate, he exiles himself to Africa, where he works as a mercenary security contractor for aid missions. The nation Feng is stationed in suddenly becomes overrun with rebels and more hired guns, led by an American codenamed Big Daddy. Chinese citizens are quickly evacuated, but when Feng learns that his fiancée was murdered long ago by the team of mercs now causing havoc for him again, he takes it upon himself to track down Big Daddy and deliver justice for China. While he fights his way through armies, Feng also serves as protector of Dr. Chen, his colleague Dr. Rachel Smith, and his adopted daughter Pasha. Dr. Chen is working on finding a cure for the deadly disease Lamanla, and after Chen is killed by mercenaries, Feng learns that Pasha carries within her the experimental cure for the disease. In a final showdown, Big Daddy tells Feng that the bullet that killed his fiancée came from his gun, and in a rage Feng finally kills the rebel leader. Bouncing missiles, flipping tanks, and an oddly placed amazing grace. This is Wolf Warrior 2. When did you said you watched it in the theaters, right?
Yeah, I actually saw it in United States because I saw the advertisement for Wolf Warrior 2 like about a year before it came out. I saw it on Weibo, on Chinese social media, and at the time it was a very short clip. I thought it looked ridiculous. And when I realized that movie was going to be released in U.S. simultaneously, I was curious, but I went to the theater expecting it to be really cringy, and so I had the expectation I'm going to be there, watch it in my Mystery Science 3000.
Yeah. But it totally turned out to be awesome, right?
Oh, I know. I was like, as soon as the movie started, like the opening shot, that was just amazing. I was just blown away by that, and like it was just non-stop action. Like there was like so many. There's like different scenes, and they just kind of roll from one to another. And I was pleasantly surprised. Let me tell you.
It's like one of the only ones they, put the time in for the music too, and it really keeps up with it. I don't know. We were talking about this recently too.
Yeah, so I did some research afterwards. It looks like they got some help from Hollywood.
We talked to the help for later in this episode.
Yep.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I mean, that shows. I mean, like, I expected to see like a dodgy Chinese production where they have like just like really cringy, unconvincing, like patriotic education type of propaganda movie, but what I got was Chinese Rambo, which is great.
Totally. Wudang's just too cool for that second-rate stuff.
Yeah, how did you guys hear about it?
Andrew and I just like watched it a few years ago, like during a summer. This is way before we thought about doing the show, just because it made so much money. I guess both of us.
We were like, "Oh wow, I'd never heard of this movie, and this movie's huge. Maybe I should."
It's gotta be interesting in some way.
Exactly. And it turned out to be.
So the funny thing is, I was pretty hyped about the movie after I seen it. I went on social media, like totally hyping it. So some of my Facebook friends, they went out and got Wolf Warrior 1, on video, and they're like, "Dude, Wolf Warrior 1 sucked." I'm like, "Dude, I didn't even see Wolf Warrior." But just go watch Wolf Warrior 2. It's like supposedly a sequel, but it's really a standalone movie, and it kicked ass.
It totally does. I think I might be the only one of us who watched Wolf Warrior 1 as well, and it's a lot less of a exciting. Like the locations aren't as exotic. It's more of like a training exercise for most of it, which kind of makes sense that a training exercise for this next movie. Almost.
Yeah, I mean, like I think it was supposed to be like a low budget movie, like but the Wolf Warrior 2 was a major upgrade. Like the producer and producer, director, and the actor Wudang, he actually supposedly put his house in Beijing as collateral.
Wow.
But, I mean,
Wow.
Yeah, but he made out. I mean, like he was probably the greatest investor that year.
He does that consistently because he did that on Wandering Earth too. He like put up a bunch of the money for Wandering Earth.
He did that right after Wolf Warrior 2.
It's crazy.
I know, he's a pro.
Yeah. Did he get a producer credit for that, or was it just investment?
For Wandering Earth, I think he might have gotten a producer credit. I'm not sure.
I don't know, but he was a major investor. Like I think what happened was Wandering Earth had some ran into some financial difficulties. So the director went to talk to him, basically trying to get money because after the huge success of Wolf Warrior 2. And they start talking, and they agreed to bring him on for a small role, and that small role turned out to be big. like he basically I think his role was supposed to be like a minor character in the book, and then they just kind of blow it up, and yeah.
In the best way possible.
His entire part, like after making the rest of the movie,
like 7 months after. Yeah, it's crazy. Carl, do you know anything about like Wudang before these movies? Because I've only seen him in like the SBL Killzone movies, apart from like his more recent stuff. Do you know anything?
Yeah, that's what he's famous for. I mean, that's his like breakout movie. I mean, his background is like in martial arts. He's like Jet Li, right? Like he was a national champion, and then he went into the movie business. And supposedly in the SPL Killzone, so he paired with Donnie Yen, right?
Yep.
most people know from Star Wars.
or Ip Man, right?
Yeah, and It Man, and so back then, there were actually some gossip about the SPL kill zone because Donnie Yen kind of dissed him, kind of dissed Wu Jing because Wu Jing was this like nobody coming out of mainland, and Donnie Yen was already a big star in Hong Kong. So there was some personality conflict there, I think, and like at least Wu Jin felt slighted.
Well, they give him awful hair in the first SPL too. He's got this weird blonde.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually never seen that movie entirely. I just saw the clips, the best fighting clips. Like him with
the knife fight between them. Oh, it's so good.
I gotta watch that one.
It's amazing.
But
Did Wu Jing ever come up in China? Like, is he do kids like him the way, I don't know, if kids like Iron Man in America or something? Because I feel like I do, at least.
I mean, really, he had the breakout role in the Kill Zone, but really he got big from Wolf Warrior. Like he made a kind of small niche name for himself when he made Wolf Warrior 1. It's a low budget movie, but he actually made decent returns. But the Wolf Warrior 2 is really that, made him a household name.
I didn't realize, I'm just on the Wikipedia page looking at this movie. I didn't realize that he wasn't just the star of this movie. He's
the director, yeah.
Dude, he did everything.
He had a co-writing credit.
He sings the song.
He sings? Oh, wow.
He's just like Clint Eastwood.
Also,
yeah.
This movie was China's submission for Best Foreign Language Film at the 90th Academy Awards.
As it should have been. It's so good.
But so was Operation Red Sea, and I feel like that has little to do with Wu Jing.
Reza, we did not like Operation Red Sea.
I mean, man, that movie, it's just I never expected something from Chinese cinema like that. I mean, the whole movie, I just rewatched it before talking to you guys. The opening shot was amazing. It opens this ocean view off the coast of Africa. I mean, it immediately draws you in the exotic locale. And then the underwater fighting scene, man. That's you didn't waste time. You went right for the action, and that's what that's like. Okay, this is what I came here for.
In the bloopers, you can see a little bit of how they filmed that underwater fight scene. Like they swim up to him with an oxygen mask. I don't know. I thought that was pretty cool. That they
I didn't see that. When I was first watching that movie in theater, I was like, dude, I mean, really? Are you fighting underwater? How much impact does it really hurt if you kick somebody in the water? that's what was going through my mind. But I still enjoy it nevertheless. And then what surprised me was the next scene, which was a little bit emotional, and he went to return his comrade's ash. I guess his comrade from Wolf Warrior 1, which I haven't seen. And then what surprised me about that scene was it's a scene about the thugs, local developers hiring the thugs to demolish the home of his comrade. And this is actually a kind of this is really controversial issue in China, because in China there's a lot of conflicts between people who are forced to move, and there's so-called nailed houses who the people who just refuse to move, and then in many cases the developers, sometimes in cahoots with the local government, they'll hire the thugs to go in and smash up the house and just demolish people's houses. So I was shocked to see that actually on big screen in a Chinese cinema. I did not expect that. I did not expect that at all, and especially he also was playing as a People's Liberation Army's, I guess, special force officer.
Yeah.
And in the old style Chinese propaganda movie, you would expect it turns out, oh, he refrained from his anger and follows the rule of law.
Not in this one.
No, no,
He's a
no.
wolf warrior. Once a wolf warrior, always a wolf warrior.
Well, in the first one, the way that we're sort of introduced to him is he and his team are in this like shootout, and basically he shoots the same spot in a wall. So basically, there's been a ceasefire ordered, but he keeps shooting at this like guy holding a hostage through a wall, like. But like from the very start, he's like, I'm not the one who's gonna follow orders, He's the wolf warrior from the start.
Yeah, I think that kind of make it stand out from the old style, the Chinese state media films, because immediately in this scene he confronts the rogue developer, and you can see the point where when the developer threatened his comrade's family. You can see he made a calculated move that he was going to kill the guy, He was just going to take care of the problem right there. Even though he knew the consequences, like he would probably go through a jail time, but he didn't care. He's just going to take care of the problem. And like immediately that marked him as the maverick, right? I mean, like that kind of set the whole scene. And like this whole movie is very American in a way.
Totally.
I think that's why I think Rambo is like a Chinese Rambo is a total apt description, because it's there's a lot of kind of glorification of individualism right there.
Yeah,
there really is.
The entire way through, it's just him. Like we watched Operation Red Sea, and I think it ends up being like very similar sort of location like setting, but it's just one guy. He frees the entire like workforce. Yeah. But it's like a very similar setting, but like just zoomed in.
Yeah, he's like the one-man army, right? He's like the Chinese Rambo.
And like apparently Xi Jinping like loved the first one and then was really waiting on the second one. So like that's kind of like just weird. Like it's pretty inapt with everything we hear about the PLA.
There'll be a third one coming up soon, so he'll have that to look forward to.
That's what happened. They show at the end of the movie, right? Wolf Warrior.
Yeah.
Set up for this like really exciting kind of suspense trailer for Wolf Warrior 3, but I don't know. Like it's because I heard rumors that Wolf Warrior 3 might be canned.
He was gonna free
I
to
don't
bet.
know. It might just be a rumor. Like it was like those Chinese social media rumors, because there was a rumor going around that there's a temporary what's it called, moratorium for movies like Wolf Warrior 2 and Operation Red Sea, because some people complain that it showed too much of China flexing its muscle, and they don't want to project that kind of image in the era of trade war with U.S.
Too soon.
To stir up unnecessary patriotism, like when people are already getting riled up, they don't want to they don't want to rock the boat too much. That's what I heard.
I've seen that too. I've seen a couple of articles about that.
Speaking of that last scene, though, at the end of it, that was sort of the Wolf Warrior 3 trailer, I think this is the only movie we've watched on this podcast that had a stinger scene.
Dude, it's basically a Marvel movie. They're just going for like the.
Well, they hired the Marvel like parts of the Marvel stunt team too.
Oh, really?
Interesting. Yeah, and I read somewhere that Joe and Anthony Russo were brought on as advisors in part for this, the directors of the latest Avengers. Do we want to talk about the African setting of this? Because
absolutely.
China's been like a major player in Africa for a long time now, like maybe becoming the major player in a way.
Like this movie came up a bunch.
This is probably the first Chinese movie that big Chinese movie that took place in Africa. I mean, like I'm discounting all those Jackie Chan movies.
Sure.
But like I'm talking about like a mainland Chinese production that has Africa as a backdrop. I mean, in a way, like it kind of plays to the the Chinese current Belt and Road Initiative, the new Silk Road project, where the Chinese firms are urged to go out to places like Africa, invest in infrastructure and get involved in different projects. You can kind of see that in the movie. You see all these different Chinese people in kind of various different capacities, and then you see like the Chinese Navy getting involved. Actually, the part of the operation, part of the plot of the movie is sort of based on the Chinese evacuation of Chinese nationals during the Libyan War. During the overthrow of Gaddafi, there were like tens of thousands of Chinese workers who were in Libya, and so the Chinese Navy sent out a couple of ships to evacuate the Chinese national. And same with the Operation Red Sea, which you guys talk about. That was based on the
Yemen.
The Yemen evacuation during the Yemen Civil War, when Chinese Navy sent another warship to evacuate the Chinese national. Of course, they made it like totally Hollywood and added all these like fighting and explosions. But really amazed me about the Wolf Warrior 2. One is this: it's really taking a big chance. It's sitting in the exotic locale of Africa. It's about the total promotion of individualism. It's like basically a Hollywood movie in played by a Chinese guy.
Well, so what's interesting also about Wu Jing as a Chinese guy, because there was some controversy after this movie about him having a Hong Kong passport despite the Chinese passport at the end of it. His son has, I think, some sort of EU citizenship. His son has a green card. His wife also has some
because one of the big draw of the movie, right? Like one of the he plays really on the Chinese nationalism. It's very explicit by the last scene with a passport that says, I think, like
wherever you are, we'll protect you.
Possessor of this passport, we will protect you. And also that's reflected in the movie posters. Because one of the movie poster, he paraphrased like a really famous ancient saying. The original saying is from like 200 BC Han Dynasty general who led a very far off expedition into Central Asia to fight off the Xiongnu or the Hans. And he to justify his action, he famously said something like 犯我强汉者虽远必诛, which means whoever offends the strong Han, no matter how far, we will get you. And the
oh god,
and the movie poster. So the movie poster for Wolf Warrior 2, they paraphrase that, except instead of using Han, they use China. So like whoever offends China, no matter how far, we will get you. and so nationalism is a big part of the appeal of the movie to the Chinese moviegoers. I was in the United States, right? I was watching this in Orange County. The theater was full, and it's all like overseas Chinese or diaspora. And at the end of the movie, they had like standing ovations, people standing up and clapping when the passport appeared on the screen. I was like, wow, like that was pretty amazing. The strong association with Chinese nationalism this movie has. There are a lot of people like Wu Jing's critics in China, trying to dig up dirt on him. Why do you have a Hong Kong passport then? Why does your son have foreign green card or passport? Because Wu Jing was being criticized for cashing in on nationalism for his movie, and I think he responded saying like, oh, what's wrong with that? I'm Chinese. And I think it's because of that remark, people are doing some background check on him and stuff.
It's also interesting that it's not just a show of like China protecting its people. It's in the factory where he's like, everybody's leaving. It's kind
It
of
was
a
very
statement
like
to Africa as well.
responsibility to protect, like, the only ones there to do it.
I still feel like that's a very American though, because you kind of expect that in a Hollywood movie as well, and there are parts where the setting is in Africa, the locale, but in a way, a lot of the African people and the locale serve more like a prop, kind of like Hollywood movies.
Totally.
Where, if you think about it, all the African characters in the movie, the little kid he kind of adopts, and the kid's mom, they're kind of like just the comedy relief.
Yeah.
You don't have like a really like a strong African character who is, there's more character in the villains, right? I actually like how they have individual personality for the villains, like the Great Bear,
Big Daddy.
Big Daddy, yeah.
Yeah, the Athena, the Ghost. You have these individual villains where they're all different personalities. I think it was also like a very intentional of the movie to have the villains as some European mercenary.
Well, American mercenaries
American
too.
specifically. Yeah.
Oh, they were American. Okay, I wasn't sure.
No, they didn't specifically say American mercenary, but there were
obviously Frank Grillo is American.
Oh, right. I mean, everybody was speaking. Except for Big Bear, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Obviously Russian. the head honcho, Big Daddy. He's Frank.
Frank Grillo.
Yeah. He's speaking with American. I guess. Initially I didn't. I just assumed they're supposed to be like European mercenaries in Africa, just because Europe. I mean, in my mind, somehow Europe were more involved in Africa, and that was a very conscious decision to cast, them as the villains, because Europeans that's associated with the traditional associated with colonialism in Africa. But whereas like the Africans are the people that needs to be saved, in a way that's not too different from Hollywood. In Hollywood you have the American hero go to some exotic locale like Africa to go save the locals. But
this is like a weird white man's burden kind of movie, but just Chinese.
Yes. That's why I think like Chinese Rambo is a total apt description for Wudang. And I wish they could have done a little bit more, but I guess it's kind of expected, because even though China is having more engagement with Africa right now, but for vast majority of Chinese people, Africa is just as remote as it is for most Americans. I mean, it kind of serves as a movie prop, basically.
Although there are like a large number of Chinese like civilians going over there for like, to start businesses, to start work. From what I've read, it's like in some ways people use it as sort of like the American West in the 1800s, in that like there are already people there, but we're gonna go set up, and there are like obviously way fewer people there. There's more opportunity there. What I've read people talk about. I
mean, there's like enough Chinese in like Ethiopia to basically qualify as a minor demographic.
Yeah,
there are like 100,000 at least or something.
In Namibia, there are border towns that are controlled, that are like almost entirely Chinese, which is amazing to me. It's
and this is very recent development.
Yeah,
too. It happened like since 2000. I mean, like it's literally just last 10, 20 years. I mean, like Africa before is just so exotic. I mean, but now it's you have people who are in Africa, have local connections and bring in their like relatives from China going over there. And like, it's funny because I was just talking to my cousin, and he told me about one of his friend who is in Africa.
Oh, wow.
They're trying to trying to do some kind of import-export of seafood because there's like abundance of seafood in Africa. Sure, I forgot which country they were in, but one of the problems because of the distance, right? The only way they can do it is by airlift, and so what they do is they try to do these airlift all these live crabs from Africa to China. Like it was very detailed. Like so like 90% of the crabs would actually survive to make it to Guangzhou. But if any city who is any further away from Guangzhou, like Shanghai or Beijing, the survival rate is not good enough to make a profit. But I was just amazed. Like here's my cousin, talking about his business in Africa. Yeah, it's a lot more common now apparently.
Pretty amazing.
What's your take on how positive the relationship comes off in the movie?
This is a Chinese movie, man. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like
super positive, right? Like he adopts a kid,
He
Well,
does.
first of all, like that's what kind of a Chinese audience are expecting, and this is also like this kind of go along with the official Chinese narrative about the Chinese role in Africa is to win-win, right? To help the Africans, and yeah, that's why I wish like they had a little bit more actual African involvement in the movie. It's just like the Chinese version of Hollywood, where Africans are kind of the passive subject, they're being acted upon. They're
recipients of aid.
Well, actually, literally, the sort of MacGuffin is the little girl, the little African girl that like everybody's trying to sort of chase down for the
Antidote or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
After all that criticism, I have to say at least like you try to promote, right, some sort of Chinese African friendship, and that I think it's well intentioned. You may not reflect the reality on the ground, but the movie itself is well intentioned.
This is Belt and Road in theory.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's Belt and Road in cinema. There you go. And think about trying to get back to the movie.
There's a tank battle we haven't talked about. Like, there's so many amazing set pieces we haven't talked about. Like a tank battle. Like, oh my god.
But even before that, there was the scene where the scene where they went. They're like I was thinking about just all the even like some funny moments like when he rescued the American doctor Rachel and they were driving back through the savannah and she said, "Oh yeah, we should go to the American embassy." Yeah, because there will be Marines there to protect us, and there was like total opportunity for the movie to kind of snub the Americans because then Wu Jin asked her, "Oh wait, how did you contact them?" And she's like, "Oh, I added their Twitter account." That was the funniest moment I remember. And right after that, because Wu Jin laughed at her and basically tells her, "Oh yeah, I saw the American flags on the ships leaving the harbor," and so she got pissed and she stepped out of the Jeep, and then like right away the camera pans out to like these lions on the side of the road just munching on the zebra, and she's like, "Oh crap," and then she's very carefully backs into the Jeep again. I mean, that was a great scene. I loved it. Or even before that, when their Jeep kind of turned over in the pit of dead bodies.
Yeah.
It was like one moment it was like this a classic car chase movie, and then this next moment you have like zombie apocalypse. When all these patients suffers of the so-called lambda virus were like gathering around them. I was like, whoa, what happened? Like it's almost like it's turned into a zombie movie, right? Like right there. There was a moment of tension there. And then
he gets confused too, because he goes to like shoot them and she's like, no longer an action movie.
Yeah.
After that intense car chase scene, they just have like a bunch of food aid in the jeeps.
Right, somehow. For some reason,
Yeah,
they have all this food.
that was just great pacing. I mean, like it kind of
Yeah.
it pretty seamlessly from one scene to another. And before we even get to the tank battle, what about those drones, man? Like I think
Yeah.
I think that's the first time I seen in like a big blockbuster where like the drones were
Oh hell yeah!
yeah, like the arm.
That was one of the first things before like we ever thought about doing this as a show. It was like that really got to me, like the urban warfare, like just seamlessly use the drone.
I mean, I just love how you rose from one action to another because hey, I'm an action fan, and I'm a great. Me and my friends both agreed the Mad Max Fury Road was the greatest movie because there's
so
no dialogue and all action.
So good.
and I feel that's what we got out of this movie because it basically goes from action scene to action scene, but it does it well. It like kind of it adds a little bit of humor, and the actors, they have good chemistries, so it was great. I loved it.
For that drone scene specifically, it was like a little bit of Army of Two almost, right? With that older PLA soldier.
Oh yeah,
they just take down a drone by themselves, like jumping off a truck or something.
Oh my god, that was so good. He's like jumping with a burning thing to like hit the drone off the bus there. Amazing. Literally fighting a drone.
Yeah, and I love those like little characterization because when they first roll in the factory, the young factory owner, I mean, he was like a freaking show off punk, right? And like and then then you pretty soon realize that doorman, that old the factory guard, the OPLA guy, was really the guy that know what he's talking about. And the young guy kind of got put in his place a little bit, but he redeemed himself later.
He does.
When he shoots I think the turning point is when he shoots the like big bear guy through the neck, and he's like, "Didn't your mother ever tell you not to fuck with spoiled brats?"
Yeah.
I
was a little confused by that, like what they were going for with that.
Yeah, I think it's just. Well, I mean, it was a little self-deprecating humor, right, about himself, and like, cause like he's used a term in Chinese, 熊孩子, literally, in Chinese it literally means like bear child, but it means spoiled brat, and then I don't know, I think it just works well. That scene worked well for me.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like, I really like they have, like I said earlier, they have these different characterization even for the villains. They have like the big bear, the Russian guy, and his partner Athena, who's really really badass girl, and then they have that Asian guy Ghost. Like each one all have like something different, and they're not like. They're supposed to be bad guys, but they're cool.
Well, that's
like the best bad guys are.
That's a big step up from the first movie, where like the main mercenary, he's like sort of a big daddy type, and he's called a former like U.S. SEAL, but he's got a British accent, and he's the only one with personality. The rest of them are just like sort of flat caricatures. Literally, a car blows up in front of them, and one of them goes with a monotone intonation. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why people like told me, well, Wolf Warrior 1 sucked ass. I'm like, I mean,
it's Wudang's still pretty fucking cool in Wolf Warrior 1. You still get plenty of good Wudang.
Yeah. He's good. He's good. I mean, like the whole Wolf Warrior, I guess the trilogy is really his baby. I mean, he planned it out. Wolf Warrior 1 and then Wolf Warrior 2. Like, I think he planned it out in such a way, like, he started small with Wolf Warrior 1, so he will have a little bit more budget to work with Wolf Warrior 2. I really hope the rumor about canning of Wolf Warrior 3 is not true, because I would, like, totally.
I mean,
Yeah,
at this
same.
point, it would be an instant, like it would rocket up to number one. I think.
It would
for
destroy
grossing.
the top 10 list. It would just, it did, like, and also what's interesting about this movie is that it seems like a huge chunk of it takes place in English, even with like some of the dialogue Wu Jing delivers is in English. So and it didn't make much money abroad, but it seems almost like that decision might have had something to do with trying to export it as a movie. I don't know.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. I just realized that. When you bring it up, you're right. Yeah, but that's funny how that worked out, because really the movie appealed to Chinese audiences. Reason appeal to the nationalism. I mean, it became like one of the world's largest top-grossing movie just purely on the strength of Chinese
market. Yeah,
and also like. I think Dot is the owner of AMC. They made a very good calculated decision to release Wolf Warrior 2 only in like cities and areas with large Chinese population.
Yeah.
So that's why I got to see it in LA, in parts of Orange County where there's enough Chinese moviegoers. They will release it, and I actually went to see it twice.
Nice.
So the first time I was, I didn't expect anything. I was going in the mode of Mystery Science 3000, and I got blown away. And so I went to see it a second time. Both time, the movie was packed. It was mostly Chinese, either Chinese nationals or overseas Chinese. And I think that's what it was going for. But you're right. There was like that kind of international. It's trying to add that international flavor. Mm-hmm. Also the cast too, right? The American doctor Rachel. She was she was an American actress. Well, her mom was born in Hong Kong. She grew up in Hong Kong, so she's like half. But like the Frank. He's obviously American Hollywood actor.
It's pretty good too. I mean, like they usually don't hire a good villain.
They went out of their way to get someone who's actually a very good actor to play that character. A lot of personality. But I think we can't end this conversation without talking about the final climax with so many tank fights. And it's not just in Operation Red Sea there's tanks firing on each other, but here it's a lot more creative. They flip a tank, but just by running,
he outruns a tank.
Exactly.
There was tank drifting, right? Easily one of the top action scene in recent memory. I mean, I did not expect that, and it was very well choreographed too.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
It's totally believable.
Flipping a tank could have been super goofy, but honestly, I was there for it.
They did it right, yeah, and I think it is all about pacing. With tanks, I think if they ever appear in a movie, you kind of think of it like a World War II thing. They're sort of lumbering, they're a little bit slow, and it's kind of uninteresting. And I kind of felt that way in Red Sea, but here it's the pacing of it. You have that tight focus on Wu Jing the whole time. It's man versus tank in a big way, I think that's what makes it work.
Do you guys know who helped did the edit of the movie? Because I mean they did an amazing job.
Yeah, I know the audio editing was partly done in New Zealand, but the actual editing I think was fully Chinese is my understanding.
Oh wow.
Fully Wu Jing's team. Wu Jing's just got that timing.
He must not sleep.
Apparently he's a real hard worker.
Yeah, I mean, I think because Hollywood movies are silly popular in China, right? The Chinese audience enjoy the Hollywood style action, but they enjoy it more when they see a Chinese face, right? But with the Hollywood style, that. I think that's what made it such a big draw for the Chinese audience. It's something they never seen before. It's very fresh. In a way, that's what they've been waiting for all along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also, need to say that as Big Daddy crawls out of the tank, my favorite line in the movie, just like one of my favorite line in any Chinese movie I've ever seen, which is, "I guess the Chinese military ain't as lame as I thought."
Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's what the whole movie was there for. Like the entire budget was for that one line.
Yeah, it's the punchline.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like one of the thing about Wolf Warrior 2 is like people were surprised it got green lighted by the Chinese censorship board, because normally like the Chinese censorship people, they're very anal, right? Like, but there was so much like violence and action. I think one of the reason it got green lighted because Wolf Warrior 2 have kind of the implicit backing of the PLA, and ultimately PLA is the one that's telling the Chinese censor what to do, and not vice versa. So there was even like a social media joke about that. Like they show pictures of like the Chinese censor wielding the big scissors, like having the power trip over all the domestic movie production, and then the PLA comes from behind with a big gun. It's like, okay, you're gonna pass these movies. Wolf Warrior 2 and Operation Red Sea.
Well, apparently the like editing stage of the movie was super, super stressful because the censors were really pushing to make changes in it. And that, I'm just so curious to see what like the version of this movie was before they got to it.
The intense editing.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope they come out with like a director cut or something.
Yeah, that'd be so cool.
Wu
Dude,
Jing's
that would be
personal
amazing.
like Wolf Warrior 2.
Yeah. Well, also, speaking of the PLA being involved in these movies, do you know anything, Carl, about, because like it seems like I don't think they're getting their own tanks. I wonder if they, borrow the equipment of the PLA to make these movies.
Oh, right. But I did not pay attention in Wolf Warrior 2, but for Operation Red Sea, those were non-Chinese weapons. Like they actually made a kind of plausible excuse in the movie, say, because we're operating kind of under UN jurisdiction or whatever. That's why we use the non-Chinese weapons or something like that. But that was the only, I think the most obviously thing that was Chinese in both movies are the Chinese warships, right?
Yeah.
So they use they're kind of splicing the real footage of the Chinese Navy in both movies, and in the ocean, part of it's CGI, and the other part is like the real PLA Navy footage, exercise footage.
Yeah.
I was looking up the tanks when we were watching Wolf Warrior 2, like the last time we did last week, and I'm pretty sure they were like Type 59, which was modeled on the Soviet T-54, the World War II
really?
tank. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Okay.
So I had that association for a good reason.
I mean, yeah, that's so dope.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Nice.
There's a whole Wikipedia on the weapons. Like every single weapon used in the movie, somebody compiled a Wikipedia of.
People love this movie. We love this
Yeah.
movie.
We love this movie, dude.
I love this movie. Yeah. No, we're in complete agreement here.
Thanks to Carl Jha. Here's our conversation with Wolf Warrior 2 composer Joseph Trapanese.
How did you initially hear about the Wolf Warrior 2 project?
Well, actually, let me tell you the full story. What it was is I got a call from my agent, and he said, hey, there's a Chinese director in town who's trying to understand better how to create a score, create a soundtrack for his movie. He did a movie called Wolf Warrior. It was a huge hit. They're gearing up for the sequel, and he wants to meet with a music supervisor and a composer. will you come in and meet with him and meet with him as a composer? And I was under the assumption, and so was my agent, that this was purely a fact-finding tour of, the director was trying to understand what he was trying to do. But, we had a super positive meeting just talking about how, music works in Hollywood movies. And then basically at the end of the meeting, they were like, hey, the director really likes you. Do you want to do this? And I said, let me think about it. Let's keep talking. So after a couple months of going back and forth, we figured out a deal and I agreed to do it. And it was really exciting to come on board after watching the first movie and kind of just understanding just a tiny bit about Chinese cinema and where they're at. So yeah, it was, hey, meet with this director to kind of help him understand how in the Hollywood setting, how scores work. But, why don't you score the movie? So
Wow.
It was really great. Yeah.
Watching the first Wolf Warrior in that process kind of like your first sort of exposure to Chinese film?
Yes, it was. I mean, obviously I've seen some classic Chinese cinema, but in terms of modern Chinese cinema, that was the first modern Chinese movie I've really been exposed to.
What was your first impression of Wudang? What was he like? Because we only see him, on screen as the Wolf Warrior, essentially. What
Well,
is he like off screen?
That energy he brings on screen is very similar to his energy off screen. I mean, he's not as physically active off screen, obviously, but in terms of his dedication and mental stamina and desire to make something amazing, that's all there. And that's why I was excited to sign on. I saw a director who wasn't just trying to make a movie and be a star. He was trying to make a great movie and dedicate himself to being a great performer. So when you see that in a potential collaborator, you have nothing, what goes through my mind, there's nothing but the desire to help them achieve something amazing, so that energy kind of ran throughout the project, throughout my relationship to him. And through this day, I saw him maybe about a year ago. We had dinner kind of celebrating the success of Wolf Warrior 2, and he was already, I could tell he's starting to think about what's next. And so that's something that is super positive and super exciting.
Yeah. How did he present his initial vision for the sound of the movie, for the music in the movie?
That's what was really interesting. I think being someone coming from Hollywood, they were looking to me to bring something to the table for them to work with. So when they first gave me the movie, there was no temp score, there was no general direction other than, we want this to be a big movie and have kind of the touches that Hollywood is accustomed to. We want this to look and sound and feel like a real Hollywood movie. And so that was very interesting. It was, it's a little concerning to me coming to a scenario where there is no direction, but the direction was there in terms of like, size this up, make it big, make it powerful. They gave me a budget to work with an orchestra, to have a team, to like have all my usual stuff. So they really enabled me to do a great job, which is really cool.
Did you stay in California for most of this process, or were you over there as well?
I went over there once during the shoot to just kind of sit down with Wu Jing and the producers to kind of just continue our conversation. They visited me several times here in LA to listen to music, to have meetings, that sort of thing. But the majority of the process was remote. And that is something that is very interesting. I think if I were to do this whole scenario again, I do hope to score another Chinese movie in the future. But if I were to do it over again, I think I would hire a translator to allow them to speak in Mandarin, because Wu Jing has surprisingly good English. He claims not to have good English, but he has very good English. He just doesn't like using it so much. But his producer and the associate producer, they speak very good English. So I spoke to them exclusively in English. And again, this is something I learned during the process. That's kind of limiting for a creative person to work their second language. So, for instance, I was talking to the sound team at Park Road Post in New Zealand. They handled the sound mix, and they were having trouble kind of communicating, getting the right notes, and they wound up hiring a local Mandarin speaker to be the translator, which allowed the crew to talk in Mandarin, and their notes became much clearer and much more forthcoming, and that was something that definitely was a challenge for me, understanding the notes, understanding what they wanted exactly. So that was definitely something I learned from the project, is next time I do a Chinese movie to have a translator so I could allow them to feel super comfortable. Just like I said to a director the other day, I said, more importantly than what you love, I need you to tell me what you hate. I need you to tell me, like, I deliver music, I'm giving you music. Tell me what you don't like about it, because then I'll never do that again. I'll learn like what you really like and what you don't like. And that was definitely one of the challenges here was overcoming the translation.
That one time that you did get to the studio, when you were in China, what was it feel like on the set? I mean, was there like the energy of, we're making, a movie that's going to make $1 billion?
Well, that's a great question. I had heard going into this, I was told, and my knowledge of Chinese politics and current culture is very poor. I'm a typical American. I'm not super internationally knowledgeable. I try to be, but China is particularly not a forte of mine. But I heard stuff like, oh, the first movie was made for like $10 million and made $90 million. It was this giant hit, and the president of China was so into it and said, I can't wait for the sequel. So you're hearing that going, wow, this could be a big movie. But I've done a lot of movies at this point, and really the thing you have to know as a creator is that you have to derive your pleasure or you have to derive your sense of purpose from the actual job itself, because so many times we work on a movie, we pour everything into it, and the movie fails and nobody goes to see it, and the movie makes no money. So if you connect your own internal sense of success or failure with box office, you're in for a world of hurt. So I'm just going, hey, I just want to make this sound cool, and for the people who see it, I want them to go, wow, that music's really cool, and even more importantly, this film is really cool. So on set, it was surprisingly similar to the times I've been on set here in the States. It's a whole bunch of people. They were in the middle of nowhere, 2 hours outside of Beijing, but had built this like little city up on a set and had all these cars and vehicles, and Wudang was working around the clock to like not only in front of the camera but behind the camera. Obviously, it was, and I have to say it was very similar to a Hollywood movie set in the sense that everyone there was dedicated to making something awesome. I think that's kind of a through line that you'll find throughout cinema, throughout the arts. People are getting paid, are making a living, but also it's such a brutal lifestyle with working around the clock that the people who do it are just into it for loving movies, for loving cinema. So I wasn't surprised by that, because that's a very common thing for me to see, but it was, again, something that made me smile because I wasn't sure what to expect in China. But, I found it more similar to Hollywood than I thought it was going to be.
You mentioned the politics of the movie, which I find particularly interesting. Were you thinking at all about it being a politically important movie in that way for China while you were thinking up the score? Did that play into your composition process?
Well, that's a great line of thinking. I think there are two ways to go about this job that I have. One way is to kind of be completely just focused on the piano or whatever you're looking at to write music and just making great music. But obviously, we live in a society and you need to kind of think of the bigger picture, in terms of like, what is my music going to bring to this film? What is it going to add to the film that will enhance it for the audience? So when I saw the original Wolf Warrior, what struck me was it felt very much like an 80s Hollywood movie. And after kind of talking to the producers, talking to some other people about Chinese cinema, it seems that where Chinese cinema is right now, at least psychologically, is where America was in the 80s. This kind of rah-rah, like, super patriotic. For the U.S., it was like Rocky versus the USSR, or whatever. Yeah. Rambo versus the USSR. Yeah, exactly.
Just yesterday.
And I think, look, again, I really am not an expert here, but it certainly felt like China versus the world in terms of that cinema is like China establishing itself as a true, powerful world influencer. So for me as a composer, what that really told me more than anything else is just I need the music to be uplifting and inspiring and make people feel confident in coming together and uniting to overcome a challenge. I try to boil things down to its most basic and leave the actual nitty gritty of the politics out of it. You can't help but think of it from time to time, obviously, but as an artist, I'm trying to just kind of boil it down to just simply making great music,
Totally.
In contrast with the like uplifting kind of energy that you wanted to bring into this, personally, I wanted to ask about that song in the cave with like that acoustic guitar that I guess Wudang has some voiceover on.
Yeah, I have to be honest with you, I had nothing to do with that song. No, all I knew was they had brought in a really top songwriter in China to write that song, and Wudang was going to sing it. That's what I was told, and I didn't really hear it until, like, there was some talk early on that maybe I could write a theme that the song could be based on, or I could base like the love theme on the song or something like that. And unfortunately, the way schedules work, things got so compressed where that didn't happen. So my first exposure to the song was when I was basically done with the score, and they had sent it to me and said, "Oh, here's the song," and it's a cool, beautiful song, but unfortunately, I didn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, Reza and I were chatting earlier. It's like comparable to Gran Torino, but a bit better in terms of singing than Clint Eastwood maybe.
So out of nowhere, but it's kind of beautiful in its sense.
Well,
and I think strange scene.
And again, I think yet again, it's another kind of parallel to the 80s. I mean, it reminds me of how music was used in the 80s, where all of a sudden a song would just appear out of nowhere. Like, where did this come from? And, it's not a judgment on the song. It's just like, oh, okay, and now this, So I think it's very similar, and I think it is really interesting, right, that China gets all the biggest Hollywood movies of modern day, of the Marvel stuff or whatever, but their actual movies right now are kind of 30 years in the past, kind of catching up. At least that's what it seemed like when I did it. I think you guys might know this better than me. How many movie theaters are opening a day in China? I mean, it's just, and like, I think it's like 4 theaters a day year round for like the last however many years are opening. So I think they're going to catch up with us quickly. And I think what'll be really interesting is what Chinese cinema is like 10 years from now. I think it might be right up to snuff with us, just because they're moving so fast and the cultural crossover is accelerating and becoming a thing. But I know that politically right now there are people trying to put a wall in between, so to speak, a theoretical wall in between China and the US. So you wonder if that will kind of prevent future collaborations. Like, if Wolf Warrior 2 was happening today, I'm not sure if I would have been hired, because right now the political tensions between the US and China are so much. Unlike, I think what makes us lucky here in the States, we have obviously free speech, so Hollywood can do whatever they want, whereas cinema in China is heavily controlled. I was unfortunately not around at the final dub in New Zealand, but I did hear it got really tense at the end with the censors watching Wolf Warrior 2 and giving notes to Wudang about things that need to be changed, need to be ADR'd, redubbed so that it would fit in line with the party. So I think I can't speak to any specifics just because I don't know it, but
Sure.
I did hear it got really stressful at the end from people who I know. So I think what's so interesting, I'm used to getting notes from the director, the producer, maybe the studio, but in China they get notes from the government.
Right.
So I don't even want to imagine that stress. So I think it's just like Hollywood, but with that added thing. So that's going to be very interesting to see moving forward, how that guides the development of Chinese cinema. I'm sure you've had other guests talk about it. I'm not an expert on that. That's the last thing I really want to talk about.
To get into the specifics of the score, though, what I was very interested in was that it seems like the music interacts in an interesting way with the bullet shots as like a rhythmic element. Was that something that you were thinking about while making it?
It was, I think it was very clear that Wudang wanted to incorporate some very stylized cinematography and shooting techniques into his movie. So when I approached those scenes and those edits, I tried to make sure that we were pacing correctly with the type of editing and the type of shooting they were using. I mean, that's something I try to do on every film, is to kind of try to find the inherent rhythm of the scene, rhythm of the editing, the performance, and then try to match that. I think on Wolf Warrior 2 was pretty chaotic at the end of the day. I think some of the score got jiggered around, where a piece of score from one scene was actually used for a different scene. It was very interesting because there was the post-production schedule got tighter and tighter and tighter. So there's some parts of the movie where I went to see it in the theater, and I had kind of forgotten that music was used for this scene because it was moved around. But that happens in film all the time.
Were there any like very particular sources of inspiration for the score? I'm talking maybe more like cultural sounds. I mean, the movie takes place mainly in like an African setting, and there seems to be inspiration there too.
There absolutely is. I use quite a bit of African instrumentation, especially on the percussion side of things. For me personally, it's interesting. I tried to, especially with this movie being Caucasian American, coming in to score a Chinese film. I had been to China once about 4 months before starting on Wolf Warrior 2, and then I went again during the shoot. So obviously, again, I try to be cultured and worldly, but also I'm very aware of my own shortcomings. So when it comes to doing it, quote unquote, ethnic score and pulling in ethnic instrumentation, that was something I deliberately, with the exception of some African instrumentation, I really tried to stay as far away from as possible and try to make this a universal score, if that makes sense. Try to kind of, let the scenery, let the cinematography be Africa, be China, and then have the score itself be the internal emotions rather than the external setting, if that makes sense.
Totally. It was like super well integrated. We were talking about how well the movie is paced, kind of like it, at least personally, it reminded me of like a good Bourne or one of the good Batmans, where you just can't take a second off, and the score really kept up with that. So that was.
Although it did have its like soaring moments, I would say, much more so than a Bourne or a John Wick.
Well, and what's interesting about that, I have to say that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do this film, because I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up with 80s movies. So when I kind of saw how parallel current Chinese cinema is with cinema of Hollywood of the 80s, I knew there would be these soaring moments and moments where I could write a big theme. I think what's interesting about modern Hollywood filmmaking is it's very allergic to melodies and thematic moments. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to, one of these big soaring themes into a movie, and the director or the producer or the studio just looks at me like I'm insane, So I think not only was I able to use current practice and what my training is at contemporary Hollywood scoring, but then indulge myself a little bit in the music that I grew up with, which has these soaring melodic moments. And so that's something that the producers actually, one of the producers especially encouraged from the beginning to have these soaring melodic moments. And that's, it really made it pleasurable for me to do that, because I don't get to do that normally.
I mean, you get these scenes where, like, you're kind of getting chased by a tank. I mean, you definitely need, like, an intense score at that moment. So, I mean, that totally works out.
Good.
It seems like this score is also a lot less electronic than some of the other stuff you've done. Although maybe there's more electronic elements that I'm not hearing. But was that also an element of that sort of nostalgia?
That absolutely, but part of the element of nostalgia was like, really focusing on a muscular orchestra, kind of using the orchestra to kind of give you the meat and the potatoes of the score. There's plenty of synths kind of reinforcing stuff and kind of creating a fat low end and all sort of stuff that we use synths to do, kind of make it more punchy. But in terms of the general instrumentation, you're exactly right. It's quite a bit less electronic than what I'm used to doing. So that was kind of fun to do something that is more straight orchestral. But also, I have to be careful with synths, because if I push too hard, it could feel sci-fi or futuristic. So, it's definitely designed to be less synth heavy than some of my other music.
And also, there was like a good amount of diegetic music in the movie as well. For instance, there's that party scene where it seems like it's only music being played on drums within the scene. Were you also involved in that sort of thing?
I was and I wasn't. I love being involved early, and I was involved early on this film, getting a very early script, thankfully in English that I could understand, which is impressive for them to translate it, because they didn't have to. But that was cool that they did that for me, and for, I guess, the rest of the there were obviously, as you know, a number of Americans involved, so that was cool of them to do that for us. But so I knew about these scenes, we'd spoken about them, but what's interesting is where Chinese movie making is on a nuts and bolts level, they're still kind of figuring things out in terms of how to make stuff work logistically like that. So for instance, I worked on a movie here in the States recently that had a lot of on-screen music. And so I was engaged very early on to do some pre-recording and to fly to a studio where we had access to Dixieland musicians and go in and record authentic Dixieland and bring in a singer and bring in the, and then on set they had a playback engineer and the actors had earwigs so that they can sync up with the music and that sort of thing. Whereas on Wolf Warrior 2 with the diegetic music, it was this question mark the whole time. I was like, I remember asking, like, how are you going to do this? Do you need me to provide drums? And do you need me to provide, and I never got a clear answer until the movie was done and I was sent like a drum track, like, oh, these are the drums that we did on set. And it was a bit messy, and luckily we had a great music editor who was able to make something work and put it together. And I think he found some local music where they're based in New Zealand. He found some local musicians to kind of fill in some gaps. So it's like this really interesting, like, I admire the tenacity to like look, they made a gigantic movie, but at the same time, like, there were these basic questions that they just haven't established that sort of production technique of like what a pre-record is. And, I would try to educate them and try to help, but at the same time, I'm just the composer. So I could nudge, I could offer advice and thoughts and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, you just got to get it done with the resources at hand. So that was super interesting. And I knew it was going to be a challenge going into it. And it was. But again, luckily we had a great music editor, a great mix team. So I didn't have to worry about it that much, thankfully.
Sort of a more broad question. I think a lot of Chinese blockbusters do, as obviously you did with this one, do take sort of notes from more Hollywood movies. Do you think that the music will start becoming more distinctively Chinese in Chinese blockbusters? Do you see that happening?
Well, first of all, I would love that. I think I saw Wolf Warrior 2 as an opportunity for me to share the culture I've grown up with generation of Chinese artists. Hopefully, Chinese musicians are taking something away from that and learning like modern production technique. That would be so cool if that were to happen. That's something I was very vocal about when we started, that, we've even talked about I need to get in touch with again, but the producer and I have spoken about maybe doing a film music workshop in China. I think that would be awesome, because I think having, obviously, what do I know about Chinese culture? How awesome would it be for the next Wolf Warrior to be scored by a Chinese musician, and to have a distinctly Chinese voice? That being said, it is interesting whereas, I had a quick turnaround on a film recently where from spotting to dubbing, meaning from when I first saw the movie through when we were mixing the music in with the dialogue, it was about 10 weeks. And that's pretty fast. That's like 2 hours of music in 10 weeks. You do the math. Yeah. It's a lot of hard work. I've heard that a lot of, and this is Asian cinema in general, because it's made very quickly and the production value is slightly lower. I've heard of that it's not unusual for a composer to have 2 weeks to score a film. And so when you watch Asian cinema, some of it that has a lower production value, and you hear the score and you say, why is this just like random drum loops and kind of bad? You can't just blame the composer. You can go, well, if they had 2 weeks to do it, and they wrote like an hour and a half of music in 2 weeks, I mean, that's amazing. Good for them. But until we see a more traditional post-production pipeline, in the sense of like, you give the composer at least 2 months to deliver a score, ideally 4 months or 6 months, where the composer can really deliver something great. That's when I think we're going to see something really artistic and really special happening. And luckily with Wudang and this team, they realized the power of music, like what music is bringing to them. So they gave me the time and resources to do a proper score. But for a lot of Asian cinema, it seems that, and again, this is overgeneralizing. There are plenty of examples where this is not the case, but a lot of times music is an afterthought. So I think if we see music becoming more artistic and more driven by culture there, it'll be because they're given more time and resources to deliver the art that this is. It is an art. It's not just a catering or something. Yeah. But I think it's treated like catering sometimes. We're used to that. We know that's a possibility, but for it to be a really artistic thing, it has to be treated like a work of art, if that makes sense.
It does. Have you heard any rumblings about another Wolf Warrior?
I think that's something that is absolutely planned and something that Wudang wants to have happen. I think it's a question of where it fits in his schedule. And, you saw that teaser at the end of Wolf Warrior. Yeah. Yep. So I think without a doubt, we're going to see a Wolf Warrior 3. I think it's just a matter of when. And to be honest with you, I haven't heard from the guys in a few months. So you're reminding me, maybe I should email them and say hello or them up and just say, hey, how's it going? I have yet to see Wandering Earth.
It's so good.
And an amazing score
and
by
really
I think
good
a
score.
Chinese composer, yeah.
Oh, good. That will make me happy. So I'm looking forward to checking that out. Thank you.
Yeah,
guys.
that one. These are the two, like Wolf Warrior 2 and Wandering Earth, that are just like
And
really,
they're both
they,
Wujing.
they really
It's
jump
amazing.
out at you. Of course, Wujing. Yeah,
Well-
we're developing like a weird sort of cult of personality for him just on our little podcast, but it's unavoidable.
And I have to admit, I mean, Wu Jing really is an inspiration for me because, here's a guy who's been working hard for 20 plus years as an actor, having bit roles here and getting a few breaks here and there. He started in Hong Kong cinema, which I understand is very different from Chinese cinema. And, making that crossover from Hong Kong cinema to Chinese cinema is not an easy thing, but he did it and worked his way up through Chinese cinema. And so for him to see him here, and not only is he's not resting on any laurels, he's not, like the last time I saw him after the wild success of Wolf Warrior 2, he was talking about how excited he was to go back to the gym and like go this next movie and go, so he is someone who works so hard. So every little piece of success he has come via blood and sweat and just working crazy hard. So he really is an inspiration for me.
Thanks to Joseph Trapanese, here's our conversation with Wolf Warrior 2 action director Sam Hargrave. Our show is basically, we're doing a series right now on like the top 10 biggest Chinese blockbusters. And the show generally is about Chinese blockbusters. And this is sort of the culmination of the season. And in fact, I think yours might be the last interview of the season.
Is that because we had the biggest movie? No.
Exactly.
It's also the movie that absolutely inspired the show.
Yeah, totally. We saw the movie and we were like, we have to learn all about Chinese blockbusters after this.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well,
Unfortunately, the rest of the list doesn't stack up to this one.
not quite.
well,
But-
I'm just honored to be on any list whatsoever when it comes to cinema. So I appreciate you guys
I
considering.
mean, this is one of the best movies like of the decade.
Honestly, yeah. It's really up there.
Oh, glad you guys liked it.
So we wanted to start off talking about it seems like Hong Kong's stunt culture has had a really big influence on Hollywood stunt culture, and in this movie you were sort of looping it back.
Yeah,
Did you grow up on like Hong Kong stuff?
I did. I grew up, I started martial arts, my training in martial arts when I was probably 13 or 14 years old. And that introduced me to that culture, and Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee, Jet Li movies were very soon on the menu for me to devour, and I loved them. I mean, I always tended to gravitate towards Jackie Chan's style just because I love humor and action, his editing, and he always really impressed me. But Donnie Yen is always pushing the envelope, and I'm not nearly as rabid a fan as I was back in my younger years, but I try to keep up with the current any movies coming out of Hong Kong or even Korea. Like
Bringing it up to Donnie Yen, that almost like if you were watching earlier Donnie Yen, right? That would have been like, or not early Donnie Yen, but like you would have seen Wu Jing in Killzone, right?
Oh yeah, no, I loved Wudang and Killzone. That was fantastic. I was definitely aware going into the movie that was one of the super intriguing things about it is to get to work with Wudang because he stood out in that scene, and we'd always try to emulate what we saw, and that was impetus for a lot of our online videos starting out, and it really heavily influenced my work and thought process on action sequences.
Oh, wow.
So how is working with an actor who is already originally a martial artist, like in terms of doing stunts and stuff?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's very refreshing. I've been very fortunate in my career, both in Hollywood and outside of it, to get paired up with some pretty talented actors physically. Like Hugh Jackman or Chris Hemsworth, Chris Evans. They're all super talented, but they don't have the many, many years of discipline, the martial disciplines that the Wu Jing had. And I mean, he's like, was one of the highest level competitors at the time in China. He's like a legend in martial arts alone. So to work with him and to see, he just not only picks up choreography insanely fast, he comes up with ideas where you go, oh, that's a fantastic idea. I never thought of that. Like, how did you do that? Show me that so I can learn that and use that in another movie.
One like super specific thing that I noticed that came up in both Killzone, the first Wolf Warrior, and this one is this tiny curved knife that he has.
Yeah,
Was that something he like specifically brought up?
he likes He likes weapons, obviously. And for this one, he wanted to keep it very military, but he really does like the karambit is like that style of knife. It's a kind of a very regional weapon to that side of the world, and it's very unique, and it hasn't been used in a lot of movies. I mean, they made it very famous in The Raid, or at least the Raid 2, but he wanted to just put like a different spin on it and his own style to it, and I think he did a great job.
Totally. How did you first hear about the second Wolf Warrior?
Yeah, I got brought onto the project by the Russo brothers. So Wu Jing was looking to up the ante from the first Wolf Warrior. He had to, make a bigger splash, and he wanted to collaborate with some U.S. filmmakers because he said, figured they, he didn't just want to do a martial arts action movie. He wanted to do guns and fights and vehicles, and so he's like, who does that better than Hollywood? And I had just finished coordinating Civil War. He came to LA and met with the Russo brothers because they directed it. So he's like, hey, who did your action? And that was me. And strangely enough, truthfully, the first call I got was to direct the movie.
Oh wow!
Whoa!
And I turned it down because at the time, I said, I'm always interested, but I'd like to see a script and just see what the story is. So at the time, it was basically a 30-page outline. So there was, and with just story was all over the place, and I was like, oh, this is gonna take a lot of work. But they were like, oh, we want to shoot it in 3 months' time, and I'm like, whew,
Yeah.
a team of writers, and at least that much time to kind of sort this thing out. So I said, I got to pass. And so I just passed on the project, and they were like, okay. And then they came back and said, well, would you just action direct it? And then I thought about it, and I was like, that'd be fun, work with Wu Jing and get to go to China, which I hadn't been to yet, and would just be a fun challenge. Let's do it. And so I signed on, but it was through the Russo brothers, Joe and Anthony Russo, who I got introduced to Wu Jing in that whole process.
What was it like being in China for your first time on such a big set?
I mean, China was a very memorable experience. Like it was, before that I'd worked in South Africa and kind of all over the globe, but China was a very unique experience. It was a lot of people over there.
Yeah.
And it's just a very, they're very passionate about film. They're just a little, as far as the process, the gear and understanding of how a lot of that stuff works. They're a little bit behind the States, the Western cinema in that regard. But their passion and their, love for movies and figuring stuff out that, equals, if not exceeds, those of Hollywood.
With that sort of being a little bit behind, and I've also heard that their filmmaking can be a little bit haphazard in a way.
Yeah.
Were you at all worried about safety on that set?
Oh, safety was paramount for me. And you mentioned earlier the kind of, coming up, being influenced by Hong Kong cinema and that kind of action, and then kind of coming full circle. So I brought, from the States and Canada, I brought an entire team with me, like an action team.
Oh wow.
And who just helped me design and execute all of the stunts and action. And the biggest task that I gave them was safety. Just like keep your eyes open because things are, they are a little bit loose. Just a lot of it's just they don't know. They haven't been exposed to these kind of more modern safety measures. We had a great group of guys from the U.S. and Canada who were tasked with keeping everything safe. I wasn't overall in charge of that, but I had a great team of guys and girls over there helping me out. And we had to keep our eyes open because they're very loose over there. And I think a lot of it just stems from them not having the knowledge or experience in a lot of these different action scenarios.
Mm.
And so there was a lot of exposure issue. And so we exposed them to a lot of kind of more advanced safety measures. And I think we taught them a lot of things, and they're very willing to learn. There's no, not a huge ego over there of being like, oh, well, this is how we do it. They're like, oh, that's great. We didn't really think of it that way. Yeah, we tried to help.
Was there anything flowing in the other direction that you learned from them?
Technically, no. But what I did learn culturally, and Wu Jing was great about this, about being able to understand his target audience and mixing just enough Western flavor, but staying true to kind of Chinese culture and traditional cinema. So things, for example, things that in the Western world, and I would fight for this stuff because I'm like, oh, we wanted to do Western, we're gonna make Western cinema. I would fight for very kind of reserved and subdued take, very subtle. Everything in the West is like, acting wise, very subtle. Whereas over here, it's a little more on the nose. They're a little more theatrical about things, but that really translates well for that audience. That's what they know and love. And so, and he, I mean, to the tune of, almost $900 million, he obviously knew his market very well. Just crushed the whole tonal experience of that film, and really he really knew, he had a very keen sense of what his audience wanted.
I was noticing that came out in the action too. Like there's one shot where he catches a shard of glass and just slices someone with it.
Yeah.
Which it just seemed like a clear example of like this movie is heightened in ways that are maybe not on the surface.
I mean, he also captures like a missile with a mattress.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, he does. It's funny because you can very clearly see where his ideas would live and where more of our, the kind of Western ideas live. And what he did, I think, with my hat's off to him, what he did so well is mixing the two, because, it wasn't like the sensibilities, say, like in the fight in the marketplace, or like the shootout, some of the shootouts or the car chase, that was very Western sensibilities. But then to mix just enough flavor of jumping down and grabbing on with one hand the chain and using your other hand the glass to slice the throat, or catching an RPG like the rocket propelled grenade with a box spring mattress and then tossing it to the side and blowing up a car. That's very kind of Hong Kong Chinese cinema. But he just, he did it like with, again, just the right mixture. He knew what people wanted to see, and he was the chef making it all happen back there.
Have drones ever been a part of your stunt work in such a direct way as it was in this movie? Especially that one scene where Lang
jumping
jumps and takes a drone down with like a bat or something.
Yeah.
Burning.
I mean, not in like a story way as much as this one, which I thought was really creative when he was working on. It went from, should the Roach character, should they be a bunch of like toy trucks like coming in from the ground, or like RC cars, or should they be drones? And then he's like, but the idea of these drones swarming and having explosives and guns and him taking them out of the sky would be really creative, and I couldn't disagree. It is. I've never really seen that. You've seen drones before used for different things, and there's more advanced military drones in different movies. But to have a guy like jumping off a bus and squatting up in the air with an AK-47, like that's pretty unique. I thought it was pretty cool.
What goes through your mind when you hear that there's going to be a tank fight in a movie?
Not only a tank fight, but man versus tank for part 2.
Well, like mostly I go like, wow, like how the F are we gonna do that? And what's crazy is, it's just amazing, is like they built those tanks.
Oh wow.
So they had Wudang is in with the Chinese military because from the first one, so he's got a lot of friends over there and people he knows, and they help him out. But there's a guy who his kind of hobby is he makes tanks, like replica tanks.
Wow.
And so he made these tanks that we could flip over or blow up and a little faster than normal tanks, so we could do some of the the driving, to quote driving stuff. Because how he pitched it to me, Wu Jing's like, I want to do like Fast and Furious but with tanks. And I was like, okay, all right, man, all right, well, we're gonna give it a go. And so, we had a lot of fun with it, but that was very challenging. And Wu Jing, in a lot of those sequences, is actually driving the tank. He learned to drive the tank. It wasn't a double for most of that stuff. He wanted to do almost everything himself.
Wow. Did he ever get hurt, like, doing these things? I mean, this is incredible.
He got banged up, never hurt, like, injured so where he couldn't film, but he got banged up. He was rolling around, like, banged up his knees. He fell down a couple times. He had a bruised ribs. Like, it was just, I mean, not to be kind of dismissive of it, but kind of normal action hero stuff, We had a stunt double there for him, so he wasn't doing everything because it was a long shoot and he had a lot of big action to do. And I come from like the Jackie Chan school of stunts, meaning like if it's a big stunt or a big gag that you're going to see his face and it's going to make the movie better, let's use him. But if if you're behind the character and you don't see his face and it's just like a fall or some gnarly crazy thing, use the stunt double because that's what they're for. That's what they get paid for. But he wanted as much as possible to photograph it in a way where you see his face and he can do as much as possible.
We were talking to the composer of the movie. It must have been a week ago now, but he was telling us that like late on in the process, the movie ran into some censorship issues. But I know that contemporary violence is one thing that really sets off Chinese censors. Were there any conversations about that when you were planning the stunts?
Yes and no. Like because he's trying, like I said, he was trying to hit anything. He did a good job, but hit a very specific audience. He wanted what he called the hyper realism of Hollywood action, where he you mentioned like the John Wicks and or the war movies, like a Spielberg war movie, where you're really feeling it, which would be pushing the envelope for Chinese cinema, like because it's they don't get a lot of that kind of violence. There's a lot of martial arts kind of violence, but not with guns, and missiles and stuff like that. So we were aware of it, but we were kind of tasked by Wudang to push the envelope, and he's like, I'll try to work with the censors. He just wanted to do something different. He wanted, and I think he got it. The Chinese Rambo, basically.
Totally. Nice. Did he use that phrase?
We started like we were. I mean, he didn't necessarily, but we started. I don't know who was the first person to mention it, but it just felt like that because it's he's this military guy who kind of goes out on his own to save people, and he's using a lot of bullets and a lot of he's blowing up a lot of things to do it. So we basically coined him the Chinese Rambo.
It's kind of interesting too because Rambo is such an example of the politics of the 80s, and I think Wolf Warrior 2 in an interesting way is like the Chinese politics of today.
Yeah.
And most of the time when we bring up with like academics or something that are the politics of Wolf Warrior 2 interesting, they immediately jump in with this like sort of parenthetical almost of like, but American movies are political too. And interestingly, they almost immediately bring up the Avengers usually.
Yeah.
Do you think about the like politics on these movies? Like, did you experience them in different ways while working on them?
Well, it's funny. And so much of that I think is culturally grounded or culturally based. It very much felt like a political movie working on Wolf Warrior 2. Mm-hmm. It just had a very specific thing to say about China's position globally, and then their interaction with other countries. And there's even mention with of GIs and American military, just references to them. I feel it less in movies like the Avengers, at least when you're working on it. Although there is a very strong correlations and subtextual references that you can't help but notice. I just think it's because culturally you're in that country. When you're in the States working on a movie that's about superheroes, so it's already in kind of the metaphorical realm because it's fantasy because it's superheroes. Whereas you've got a more real world scenario with a movie like Wolf Warrior, and then you're in a foreign country where you're more aware of the difference in politics. So I think it was more obvious working on that it was related to political stances than working on a movie like Avengers.
It was the ship at the beginning. Was that like a mock-up of a ship, or was that in cooperation with the military over there lending a ship or something?
For which shot? The one they were
like at the very beginning. He runs. He just kind of spreads his arms and dives off the ship.
No, that was an actual ship. Yeah, that was not a fake ship. Brandon jumped off the side of a ship.
How that's like the impact of jumping off a ship like that. How do you mitigate that?
Well, he did a lot of it's crazy the amount of training he put into it. He did a lot of work with, because we did. To kind of back this up, that leads into it jumps off the ship. It leads into this quote underwater wonder, and how that came about hilariously is Wudang had this idea that it opens on in the beginning. He's got this fight, and he wants to do a fight on deck and then a fight underwater. And I was like, oh, that's cool. But what if when he goes in the water, it's more the fight action takes place more on the deck of the ship, And then once he jumps, it's kind of the last exclamation point where he jumps in. They don't know where he is, and he knocks the guys off the boat, and then that's the kind of the end of the thing. I said, and I pitched to him. I said, it'd be really cool. What if we did? And I just did this, a couple years ago on this movie Atomic Blonde. What if we did this long kind of one shot thing where you introduce the character and he's doing this great fight, and then following over the edge, he jumps in the water, and then that's the end of the one shot. And then he goes, he thought about it, and he's like, I like the idea. We should do the underwater fight, but as a oneer with no cut. And then I was kind of like, oh boy, I just stuck my foot in my mouth, didn't I? And so this idea had been planted in his head. So now, there I was. We had to design an underwater oneer. So, we were choreographing fights in pools, and he started training. We found this guy who does breath work, and this free diver is like world record free diver. And so he was going to this tank every couple of days every week before filming, and doing his underwater, it's all this deep breathing above and then holding his breath. He got to where he could hold his breath underwater for over 3 minutes.
Wow.
So that, when we filmed the bit underwater, and we did this at a pool in outside of Beijing, and we were shot there, that underwater sequence, for like 5 or 6 days. And so he would, he was doing all that. So he would, we'd be above water. He would take his, do his breathing, take a big breath, and under he went, and he would do these extended fight sequences underwater, on a single breath. His commitment to the craft was incredible.
One thing that's sort of interesting about him is like having, I think in some of his like very early movies, he was just kind of doing stunts, and also just martial arts, and having transitioned into directing. Do you see that as a sort of parallel in what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, he did it. Well, I guess we'll get to see. My movie hasn't come out, but he was extremely successful. His first movie, like, he made it, I don't know, the budget was very low, and he made like $100 million. And then he even did it better with Wolf Warrior 2. He made it for, I don't know exactly, but it was a lot more than he made the first one for. But the return, like, they made, I think it was almost $900 million in China alone. So, yeah, he has proven it. He crushed it. From going from stunts to, as an actor, and then to directing, seemed like a very natural progression. He was good at it. He knows what he wants to see. He knows how to talk to, at least in, the Chinese performers. He knows how to, like, talk to those guys and get what he wants. And I think, especially with action, he was very gracious to bring us in, and because he knows what he's doing with action too. He just wanted a different flavor, and he was very humble and said, hey, I want to see what you guys come up with. And he had ideas, of course, but I think it's another testament to the stuntman turned director that, Chad Stahelski and David Leitch have done as well in America, but he is doing kind of running a parallel path in China. And I think it's awesome. I think it's really great to not just assume that these people who are physically talented and creative, that's all they can do. Like, there's a lot more they have to offer the world of cinema.
Do you think as stunt performers becoming directors, you have a better idea of sort of what the actual limits are, as opposed to the imagined limits of what you can do on screen?
I think that plays a part, for sure. And I think the thing that is mostly important and has been done effectively by these, folks we've been talking about, the Stahelskis and Leaches and Wu Jings, is just because they do action doesn't mean you can forego telling a good story. That's the most important thing, and I think they understand. So, because martial arts has this kind of rhythm and history and storytelling through action that they have a lot of experience at doing. And then I guess you could kind of toss me in that category, just through years of doing these fight sequences and trying to tell stories through action. It gives you an understanding of storytelling and understanding the importance of storytelling, that you don't have a fight scene without it. Like, if two people are just punching each other for no reason, we don't care. But as soon as you enter story and stakes and action and consequences, then you have an interesting fight scene. And so that, I think that has been super helpful for these, stuntmen turned, directors, or action directors first, and then legit first unit directors. That's a very helpful background to come from.
Did he ever bring up, the potential of exporting this movie at all? I mean, obviously he knows, like, his domestic market, but throughout the movie they end up speaking a lot of English. Yeah. So did that ever come up? Like,
Yeah, no, he wanted to make a movie that would be as international as they could. I don't know, how I haven't kept track of it, how it's done internationally, but I know that was definitely talked about. He wanted to have, because he would love to break into the U.S. market as an actor and filmmaker, and so he wanted to have something that had just think showed that he understood that market a little bit. Definitely talked about on set, and we would do takes where it was to an all Chinese version of a scene, but then we'd also do like an English version.
Oh wow. Were you involved in like directing the American actors more so, or like was anyone helping him out? Because it just seems like in the first movie, a lot of the lines in English aren't delivered in a super
Compelling way.
yeah, it seems a little bit unnatural in the first movie, but in the second movie, that's a huge improvement.
Yeah, I did actually. I pretty much directed all of Frank Grillo's scenes.
Oh wow,
Nice.
Those are so good.
Yeah, because Frank and I mean, we go way back, and we had like a rapport. And for whatever reason, Wu Jing and Frank, their communication just wasn't super smooth at times. And so I kind of I helped out, and then it kind of transitioned. And we also would split up because there was a lot of stuff to shoot. So sometimes it would work out that Wu Jing had to go, do some other big scenes, and he's like, "Hey, you go shoot this thing with Frank. I don't want him to wait around." So, oh sure. So I go shoot a lot of stuff with Frank.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Maybe it's method acting that they didn't get along.
Maybe I don't know. Like, maybe who knows? I think it's probably part of it. They were like, we're enemies in the movie. We're not gonna get along. But they didn't ever have any big issues that I know of. It was just like kind of a communication thing that sometimes you could see it was a little bumpy, with translators and whatnot.
Were there also Chinese stunt actors working on the film, or was it entirely your crew?
No, there was a whole Chinese stunt team. Like there was probably 15, 20 stunt people because there was a lot of action in this movie.
Yeah.
So we had, Wu Jing had because there was we had different units going, and that was something that they weren't really used to or hadn't really thought about, was running a second unit, like an action unit, simultaneously with the main unit. Because we originally, for that car chase, Wu Jing, they were like, yeah, we'll do, you guys, we'll be with you for the whole time for the car chase, and I'll get in there when I need to. And I was like, it's going to take us like 10, 12 days to shoot this car chase, and I probably only need you for 2 of those days to plug you in for some of these close-ups. That's 10 days of shooting time. You could be shooting other dramatic scenes, and we could just get on on schedule or ahead of schedule. And he was like, oh, that's a good idea. So they run on, Chinese productions run on a long time, just because it's just their way of doing things. They like to be, and I can't fault them. I would love to be involved in every single frame of my movie too, but there's certain efficiency that Hollywood has come up with, as far as you got your main unit and your action unit, so you can be out when you don't necessarily need the actors. You just go out with the stunt people and get some great action pieces, and then bring the actor in and plug them in the necessary close-ups or whatever action you want them in. So we implemented that strategy. But the Chinese stunt team was great. There's Jack Wong was the Chinese stunt coordinator, and he's been on all kinds of famous Hong Kong movies. And he and his team were great. So we had a great collaborative effort between the American and Canadian team, as well as the Chinese team.
Did you guys have translators on set? Because the composer was telling us that he was having some sort of communication issues in terms of direction.
Yeah, we did, and it was tough because everything took 4 times as long, right? Because I say something to the interpreter, and it's not it's an interpreter, because it's spoken word. There's no direct translation for some phrases. So I say it to the interpreter, and the interpreter says it to Wu Jing, and then Wu Jing says it back, answers back to the interpreter. Interpreter says it to me. So it's 4, rounds there. It's funny. Wu Jing and I got to a place where we could communicate. His English got better. I learned a few Chinese phrases that I've forgotten since. But then we would almost communicate through look. We wouldn't even have to talk sometimes, because the language of action, we kind of knew, language of cinema and action was kind of universal. And we knew what the other one was thinking. And we just smile and we nod our heads, and we'd kind of have an unspoken communication, which was really cool to see develop over the course of the film.
All right, so I think that just about brings us to the end of this episode and this season of Uproar in the Studio. Thanks again to Carl Jha, Joseph Trapanese, Sam Hargrave, and all of our guests on this season.
Our original music comes from Elliot Saltmarsh and Yehuda of Fist with a PH, and our art comes courtesy of Jay Castro.
Follow us on Twitter at China Film Pod, like the Uproar in the Studio Facebook page, and maybe even Venmo us at Reza-Saeed with Uproar in your description. All proceeds go towards training our very moderate rebels. Help out. And if you feel like it, have some thoughts or suggestions, email us at uproarinthestudio, all in one word, at gmail.com.
Though we're taking a break for a couple months, we'll be back soon with a series on Jackie Chan's career post-Rush Hour 3. But before we leave you this week, we just want to share some wisdom from the chairman.
To read too many books is harmful. We will see you soon.